Hello and welcome to this Rain Taxi virtual event. It's our final one of 2022 and a very special one thanks to the three amazing writers you see on your screen. I'll introduce them in a moment. But right now, let me tell you, I'm Eric Lorber, the director of Rain Taxi. If you're not yet familiar with us, we are a nonprofit literary organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature through a variety of programs, including a quarterly print magazine of critical writing and a robust online presence that hosts events such as this one. To learn more about our programs, please visit us at raintaxi.org anytime after this event. Whether you're an occasional visitor or you'd like to become a member, we'd love to have you along for the ride. To do all that we do, Rain Taxi receives partial funding from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Minnesota State Arts Board, among other great funders. Their support helps keep most of our programs free, like this one, but our most vital support comes from individual readers just like you. So if you are able to pitch in a little something, please consider using the donate button on your screen and know that even a small gift can make a big difference. While you're on that screen, there's many other ways to participate. So many of you are chiming in on the chat. It's great to hear where you're coming from and how thrilled you are to be here. Keep your observations floating in there. We love it. If you have a question for the authors tonight, use the Ask a Question box, and we're going to get to as many of those as possible at the end of tonight's event. And of course, there's a button that says you can buy books, including this brand new book by Judith Thurman, A Left-Handed Woman. When you hit that button, you'll also see a selection of Judith's other books and books by our two esteemed interlocutors tonight. So I encourage you to poke around there and use that as well. Boy, with this in my hand, and it is such a thrill, it is my pleasure to welcome Judith Thurman. If you are among the readers who have read her landmark biographies of Isak Dinesen and Colette, you know how deeply this author can immerse herself and us along with her in the lives of incredible people. This new book of essays allows that experience to happen dozens and dozens and dozens of times over and over again, whether she's writing about Emily Dickinson, Marina Abramovich, so many other writers and cultural figures. You learn more as you travel these pathways with her. One of the things Judith Thurman says about writers she admires is that their sentences are unimprovable. And I just want to say that same accolade absolutely applies to the writing of Judith Thurman. So I'm so deeply thrilled that she's here. And speaking of writers whose sentences are unimprovable, to talk with Judith tonight and explore her book, we have two of the most amazing writers. You all know Kate DiCamillo as one of the most essential creators of children's literature currently striding the planet. You know Louise Erdrich as the poet and novelist who brings wisdom, history, compassion, humor into literature of the highest order. That they're here to talk with Judith about her work, I think speaks volumes in and of itself. So I'm going to get out of the way, listen along with all of you. Again, thank you all so much for being here, those watching and those about to speak. Please welcome Judith Thurman in conversation with Kate DiCamillo and Louise Erdrich.
Thank you so much.
Judith, and Louise. Okay, I have a reputation for grabbing the reins, which I'm not going to do right now. But I am going to ask you, like I said in the green room, Judith, if you would just, so many of the people that are listening, I'm sure know you from the New Yorker and have read some of these essays, but your introduction, which is so amazing and which you labored over for so long. And I won't ask you about why it was so hard, although I do want to know why it was so hard. But if you would just read a paragraph from that to give people a feel for what this book is.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. It's such an honor to share a screen with you. As we said before, wish we were sharing a room. It's hard to excerpt things from a short introduction, but I was talking about Heraclitus, who was who wrote about Homer, who was deceived by boys catching lice. And they told him, what we catch and kill, we leave behind, but what escapes us, we bring with us. And then I've always loved that quote, which I first found in W.S. Merwin. It was an epigraph for the lice. And so the paragraph begins, what we bring with us, embedded in our flesh and bugging it, embedded in art and animating it, is the mystery of how we become who we are. That mystery has been my subject from the beginning. With every new piece of work, I grope my way into it. First Impressions, a reportage on Paleolithic art, suggests my point of departure. It recounts the accident by which 3 spelunkers found an entrance to the Chauvet cave, which had been sealed for millennia. They were attracted by, quote, an updraft of cool air coming from a recess near the cliff's ledge, a potential sign of a cavity. There's a hidden cavity in every story, a recess of meaning, and it's often blocked by the rubble of your own false starts or by an accretion of received ideas left behind by others. That updraft of freshness is typically an emotion you've buried. Want me to read the next bit, or should we just talk?
Let's leave it with that powerful, because when Louise and I had our talk about this prior to this event, we were both so struck by that updraft, and as I as a reader and as a writer know that feeling so well, and I've never heard it articulated that way. Louise, I'm going to stop talking now so you can say that you know that updraft too. Yeah.
Yes. It's exactly, I think, what everyone it applies to everyone, that hidden emotion, that sudden moment of realizing that there's a hidden recess in your experience, or in, of course, going through the rest of the book and reading through it, I would always look for that hidden recess in each of the essays. And now, just because I just want to sort of cut to the chase here, because what if we can't get to this? I got to the final essay and I couldn't, it makes me very emotional. We start with a baptism, the renunciation of evil, something that I've, well, I was going to say I've been trying to do all my life, but, or I've been to a lot of baptisms, and there's that moment of gravity, that renunciation. And the shepherd who you begin to tell about this shepherd who offers a lamb, who says you'll have to witness the death of the lamb. It comes back later in a way that I think has changed my thinking. So I get to the end of this, and I think you say something about the mystery of self-sabotage. So can we talk about this ending, the relationship between shame, self-sabotage, and unconsciousness?
Well, this is, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's a piece that means so much to me. It's a piece on Dante, on Purgatorio. There were several new translations of Dante's Purgatory, and the pretext for the writing about Dante was to review the books, and so the piece did start with the recollection of going to the baptism of one of my godsons in Tuscany, in a little hamlet, in a little church. And what I don't say explicitly in the essay is that the co-godparent was James Baldwin, and the villagers was very remote. He's 50 now, Balthazar, my godson. So they had never seen a Black person in person. They, of course, had seen Black people on television, but they had never seen anyone in person. And so they went up to him and touched him. One woman thought maybe that the color would come off. And he in this, and he, and that beautiful voice of his, and sort of renouncing evil on behalf of the baby. And at the end, at the end of purgatory itself is, we know what purgatory is. It's a middle place between hell and heaven, in which you have the opportunity as a sinner to atone, to it's not atonement, it's understanding where you went astray.
Mhm.
So it's not only understanding where you went astray, it's understanding the arc of your life, because of course everybody's dead. And so you have this incredibly precious rear view. You have this incredibly precious perspective on your life and the mistakes and the opportunities that you had. And in that respect, the translation that I was reviewing was by a psychoanalyst. And while he was so informed by his practice, he's also a deeply spiritual person. He's a Buddhist, and so the spirituality came into, I think, his thinking about Dante. It sort of permeated the. So it's it's that mixture of the fear of having to face your fears, because the sinners are tormented, in fact, by flames, or by the weight of their pride, or by hunger. So it's having to face your worst fears, as in, for example, 1984, until you're really enlightened about them, until you're not blaming anyone else, until you are accepting the responsibility for the life that you've lived. And in a way, that's what one does as a biographer in on behalf of your subject, is to try to help make sense of that person, the arc of that life, and the mistakes that were made, and the things that were faced bravely, often in the work and not in relationships in the life. So it was a piece that gave me a chance to think deeply about many themes that I've tried to penetrate.
Wow. Wow. It's just, I mean, we could spend all of our time on that, because it's funny that when we talked, there were things that stood out for me and things that stood out for Louise, and things where we intersected. But, I was so struck by this. I saw this again and again, and I'm a big fan of your biography of Isaac Dickinson, and this artist after artist in here is convinced of their singularity, which reminds me so much of Dickinson, who just absolutely wanted to be compared to nobody else. And again we get that. And then in Anne Lowe, the dressmaker,
Right.
and there's this almost a radiant sense of belief in her own powers. And that to me was so moving, and it shows up again and again and again. You say at one point that lost women are your specialty.
Yeah.
And I would like you to talk about how you perceive them as lost, because again and again there is this belief in their own powers. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I'd love to, actually. It's I think we're talking about mostly the women's subjects. There are a few men in this book, but it's mostly women. And in every case, the women were embattled by patriarchal conventions, and the power structures, and the very low to non-existent expectations for girls growing up, and the lack of models, and then also by the shame of being different. That's also something that and so the shame of being different, these artists convert the shame and the anxiety about being different into a sense of singularity that empowers them. But it also has to be said that there's a sort of downside to that, and because in so many cases too, that sense of singularity, which they absolutely need, it's a rocket, it's a sort of booster rocket, but it can also lead to grandiosity.
Mm.
I think that Dickinson certainly suffered from it, and I think Marina Abramovich, whom I love, certainly does too. I don't think she would even deny that. So it's I think, and I wrote this somewhere else, not in this book, but that when men's grandiosity usually takes the form of a feeling of omnipotence, and women's of a feeling of uniqueness.
Ha.
So that sense of being unique, none of us is unique. We're all unique, and we're all and we all resemble everybody else too. So that's sort of something that one kind of tries to deal with the subject and with oneself. But yes, the women needed, and you think of Simone de Beauvoir and the her notion of the subject and the object. We're getting to the nitty gritty of writing about women's lives, which is reclaiming their subjectivity, reclaiming our subjectivity, reclaiming our sense of being our own subjects. So I think that definitely has to do with the singularity, the sense of singularity.
And Louise, it also, you had a question that was really interesting to me, because it goes just exactly with what Judith was talking about how you claim your powers without becoming a monster, right? Isn't that, and that runs like a theme through all of this too. It's just like it's such a balancing act. So who are the men in here? Are Alexander McQueen and Dante? Is that right?
And Balthus, the painter.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And Charles James, the couturier, and Dante. Let's see. No, I've forgotten who the men are. That's a terrible thing to say. No, I mean there are some. Not that many. There are men in the language pieces. There's my polyglots. There's a wonderful Mohawk chief in the piece on lost languages. And
don't leave languages, Judith, because that's where I need to hear you and Louise talk about that, and I think a lot of people need to hear y'all talk about that. So Louise, language, those essays.
Yes. Before that, something you were talking about just made me think back to one of my favorite little snippets in the beginning. Is your aunt telling you one of the most useful things in your work, which was don't be sentimental about happiness.
You're too sentimental about happiness.
Happiness. I felt throughout that there was this, the balancing act has to do with this idea that happiness is something that we strive for, that we're going to get to, rather than that is a state of being, rather than some sort of momentary flicker.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's ephemeral. No, the idea that the whole a successful life is one that I think grapples with its instability, because neither gender nor identity is stable, and happiness moods are not stable, so I think that engenders this kind of yearning for something unconditionals, and I think that's partly the tug of war of an artist's experience. I don't know, what do the two of you think of that in your own practice? It's a word I kind of don't like, because it's an art curator world, but it's a practice. So what about that instability for you?
Well, that's all it is instability. It's like crawling around on your hands and knees trying to find the updraft. That's what it is. And when you feel that updraft, there's pure unmitigated joy, right? But then comes the work of excavating and getting to where that, and it's just but there's joy. It's just transitory when you find where you should dig. Louise, what do you have to say about that?
Crawling around is my
Default is
What are you doing? I'm crawling around. I'm just crawling around. That's my.
I want to get y'all on the language thing, and I want to use
Okay, yes.
your quote about, and this is in the beginning, I think it's in the introduction, language's archaic power to free a trapped spirit. And that is just, I came back to that quote again and again. But I want y'all to talk about those language essays, because it was fascinating when we were in the green room and you were talking about it. So I'm going to be quiet while you do that.
Well, I'd love Louise to tell the audience we were talking about Ojibwe.
Yeah.
Right. So Lost for Words is about nearly extinct and endangered and largely languages with very few speakers and indigenous languages.
Yeah.
And we're talking here from Minnesota, where the Dakota and the Ojibwe languages are in the throes of revitalization. I mentioned that my daughter is part of a language nest, and we spoke about language nests. And her son is speaking Ojibwe as a 2-year-old. The most extraordinary thing, it comes at the end, where you know one final speaker of a language named anyway, where he and a woman who hasn't spoken the language for 80 years finally speak. There's 2 people who speak the language, and she dies 2 months later. When you think about who we are, our basic question in the beginning, are we our language?
That is such a profound, unanswerable question. And I think it depends really on our cultural relationship to language. Because I think that in the case of that old woman, and she was from a community in the far south of Chile and Argentina, kind of Patagonia and the Antarctic Circle. And there was a community that was pretty much wiped out by white settlement. And along with wiping out the people, they almost completely obliterated the language. But there was a student who was a genius, a language genius, whose mother was a member of a community next door to the Selknam. And he taught himself this language from an 18th century grammar that a missionary had done, and from the few recordings of the surviving speakers of the language. And he went to visit the surviving Selknam with a trained linguist who became the subject of another piece, and to see what they could record and rescue, and to see if they could actually speak. And the linguist couldn't believe that this young man, this teenager, really spoke the language until he tested him, until he saw this moment coming to life. But I think for the people, the indigenous people whose languages are endangered or in the process of being lost, or as with the Ojibwe, in the process of being revived, the relationship to nature, to the environment, to the plants, to the wildlife, to the stones, to the ancestors who the spirits of their ancestors who are there and with them. I think that changes your relationship to language. It's not like you're going to you're not learning it in pre-K in Brooklyn. I have step grandchildren who are doing that, so I'm sort of aware of that. So I think that's a kind of visceral relationship to language that we lose in a modern modern conditions having been around for centuries in the West, that we lose also when we learn to write and when we learn to read, and we're experiencing language on the page. These are oral cultures. So language is in the air. Language is a form of music. And it has the original attachment. What you try to do as a writer is to make the a sort of arc in your brain between the left and right sides of your brain, between feeling and thinking. And I think in those indigenous languages, that arc is there from the start. So that's why that piece was so moving to me. And that's why meeting people who are struggling to keep these languages alive and to pass them down. Your grandchild and their peers will determine the success of Ojibwe, because if young people, 7-year-olds, it's kind of at the age of reason, so-called age of reason, that kids make a choice to go on with the language, ancestral language, or no, they can't. They just want to be on TikTok and don't want to do it. So it's up to them, which is right. And that's what the great Mohawk chief said. He said, well, they'll either decide to go on with it or they won't, in which case the mother will take it back. So mother meaning the earth. So I'm so happy for you that you are the grandmother of a speaker.
I was very impressed with the idea that you have to give young people a sense of the prestige that speaking in their indigenous language really brings. And I think that's possible through TikTok, through various forms of social media. And I think it does happen. Well, we can talk about more of this later, but I was grateful that you went to the places, that you talked to the people, and that you brought this into your work.
There's languages that there've been some great success stories. Welsh, Hawaiian,
Yes.
and Maori in New Zealand. If you are a Maori in New Zealand, you can go from kindergarten through university to graduate school in Maori. You don't have to study in English at all if you don't want to.
A lot of people go to New Zealand or Hawaii to study immersion. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I loved about Maori, but it's easier because there's one central indigenous set of people and a smaller population, is that there are signs in Maori in New Zealand. The haka, everybody learns the haka, which is an enormous piece of energy.
Yeah.
And so the indigenous culture has become also New Zealand culture, and I think that's part of the power of what the Maori people have done.
Absolutely, they have. In Wales, also the signs are in Welsh, and you have to study Welsh up until you're 16. But of course, and so everyone has some Welsh, but you have to use a language also.
Right.
English. One of the linguists called English. He said he refers to the bully languages.
Yes, you said that. That's
bully.
exactly
English is one, French is one, Spanish is one, Mandarin is one. They're the languages that are irresistible because that's their languages of commerce and of power. They're the power languages. A language that's interesting that not that is Catalan, because Catalan always had Catalonia was a very rich part of Spain, so it had the prestige and the wealth behind to lift up the sense of community, and so Catalan is spoken by millions of people.
Well, I think one of the good fortunes we have, really, I have to say that being able to write in English gives us, in a way, it's a dark gift because it's a colonialist language that has sucked in language after language, culture after culture, and has no boundaries.
That's a beautiful way. Dark gift.
Yeah.
You have to keep that. That is the most wonderful title and notion. The dark gift. Wow. Yeah.
But we're all using it.
Yeah.
Using it.
So I think we have to use it.
Yeah. I keep on, dark gift is amazing, but I keep on coming back to that whole thing that you said, Judith, about just now, the left, when we write, we like work to get the left and right brain together. But if you're speaking a language that where that connection has not been lost,
Right.
it is, and that goes to your original question, Louise, about like, are we language? Because it's just like, it is a different world you inhabit if the left and right brain don't need to be brought together, right? It changes the world that you're in, and it's like, it's a fascinating, it's just like, it's kind of like gobstop to think about that. Yeah.
Did anybody in your family speak Italian?
No, it's funny. I was thinking about that as y'all were talking. So my grandparents came over as children. My father was fluent and refused to speak it in my presence. Every once in a while, an andiamo would come out, but it would, because it was so, it was so not a good thing. You don't. It was just no Italians. That was the sign that was on the door a lot, and yeah. And so I never, and I would have loved to have had it,
You also would have known an aspect of him that you didn't.
Right. Well, and there were so many aspects of him that I didn't know. But yes, that's exactly right. And that his whole relationship with his parents was tied up in that language. So it's just, it's a mystery that I will never be able to unravel. But that one word, andiamo, is very loaded for me, and it always came out unwittingly. He did it when he was in a hurry.
Let's go.
Let's go. We're in a hurry. Yeah.
But I think there's something else here that we should just touch on, which is that speaking and writing are very different. It changes your relationship to language when you are literate. And in fact, there's a part of the brain that there's that's activated by literacy that people who are illiterate don't have, and they develop it if they learn to read. So literacy changes the brain. It literally changes the brain.
Wow.
And I'm sure it complicates things up there. So, and we've all had this experience when you have an idea, you have a thought, and you have to translate it into written language, and it's going somewhere else. You have to do other things. You have to engage other muscles and other powers and other movements. So writing and speaking are different. They're
it's so funny to me to hear that, and it's like because it's such unknowable. I mean, I think we all would agree that it's a mysterious thing, right? We do it. We don't know how we do it, and to hear the science of it deepens the mystery of it. It makes it even more magical and unknowable in a way, because it's such a strange thing to do, right?
Yes, other beings, creatures have languages. There are lots of languages in the animal world. They're not spoken languages, and we don't know if there's a grammar because we don't understand them. And we may know what certain signals mean, or songs, or but we can't really translate them. There's no Rosetta Stone for that yet.
One of the interesting things about Ojibwe is that from really almost the beginning, people were writing using English phonetics to write in Ojibwe. So people who were in World War I were writing back to their family in Ojibwe, only it was phonetic. And only in the, I think the 1970s was an extraordinary dictionary put together, and a way of a very simple, beautiful double vowel system.
Wow.
So there's no diacritical marks. There's no surprise, things that you don't know when you're reading Ojibwe. The words can be as long as you described as Mohawk words, but they are, it's pretty easy to pronounce and understand.
How's the grammar? Is it very difficult? Are there lots of cases and
Well, there's no masculine, feminine. There are many. It's verb heavy.
yeah.
Which would make sense. There are not very many things, but there are so many verbs. And you described the various forms of love and relationships, which is the case also with Ojibwe. But what is extraordinary to me is that every verb changes with every situation, and who's in the picture, who's not there. And to learn to speak that without thinking it out first seems impossible to me. It's so difficult. I mean, all these languages, when Guinness Book of World Records was actually what it used to be, they were in the Book of World Records as being most difficult.
That's so interesting. Well, one thing is that I discovered in the research on languages is that the brain, the reason why you can speak a language without an accent is because your brain is so plastic. And that plasticity tends to disappear at puberty, by which time you have learned your mother tongue. And so the brain is now free to specialize. It's not, the brain has lots of has to learn, whatever. So it takes away some circuits from language and devotes them to the various tasks of adolescence and adulthood. And it's at that point that you can learn a language. But for most people on the planet, you're not going to learn it like a native speaker. But there are these extraordinary exceptions, people whose brains remain plastic. And those are the people they're studying to see how that plasticity, which would be very valuable in treating many disorders and very valuable in treating injuries, and also just fascinating and important, if that can be prolonged. So
what brought you, what started you on looking at language acquisition and finding the prodigies?
I have always loved, I speak 4 languages, and I learned them. I learned French in school. I learned French in a New York City public school, but I had wonderful teachers, and I love the experience of learning another language and of escaping into it. And because, especially in the beginning, a language speaks you, you're someone else in a foreign language. And then, one of my roommates in college who was completely quadrilingual. She could go from one to the other with no accent. She learned them young, and she spoke all 4 of them. And she, her mother, and her friends from school, they just switched in every sentence. And this was the most glamorous thing I had ever been. I thought, well, I want to be that person who can do that. So I was living in Europe, and I had the chance to study and to learn these other languages. And I have a good ear for it. I have a good ear for the accent. So my accents are better than my grammar in a lot of instances. So I was just fascinated by the way that it shapes you. That when you speak another language, you're aware of how it shapes you. You're not so aware how it shapes you in your mother tongue, but you're very aware when you switch into French or Italian that there's this sense of it's speaking you, of being inhabited, by the whole culture of this other place. So I just found it absolutely fascinating. I just would like to. I tried to learn. My son has been living in Vietnam for a long time. He speaks perfect Vietnamese, which is, so I decided I would study it. He was not in favor of this, but I tried to learn it online, which you cannot learn a tonal language online. You have to have can't do it. So I tried to learn Vietnamese, and you can learn lots of words, but no one will understand you. You have to understand the tones. You have to be able to use them fluently. You have to be able to speak Vietnamese. So, and I've always wanted to learn. I think I may do that this year. I've always wanted to spend my old age studying ancient Greek. So I think since my old age is now here, I think it's time to put my money where my mouth is, literally. Study ancient Greek.
Can I ask? You know, this is like this is a very short essay, and it goes in, and it's, we're going away from language for just a minute because I just love Mara Coleman's mother and her closet, Sarah Berman's closet, right? Which I don't remember reading that piece of yours in the New Yorker, but I have the book and I reread the book all the time because there's something so compelling about it, and you were able to like condense what was so compelling to me, and that hold on, I've got it written down right here. This, that you are free to change at any age. What an astounding sentence, and what a takeaway. And it's like, and when I read that, it's like, that's why I keep on going back to that book. And that she's an apostle of simplicity. So Mara Coleman's mother, like, just like tell the story as quickly as you can.
She was married young and had children, and the family settled in Israel, and then they moved to New York, and blah blah blah. But she was unhappily married, she was a mother, a housewife. She wasn't. She didn't have the life she wanted, and at a certain point, she just said, "Nope," or she said, "Yes." And she divorced her husband, and she de-accessioned everything that was not necessary. And what's great about Sarah Berman is that she knew what was necessary. I mean, how many of us can say, I suppose that's the Marie Kondo thing, you know, do you love this thing? Is it necessary to you? But she did. She was the first. No, she wasn't the first, but she understood that she had to radically simplify her life, live with only the things that were beautiful and necessary to her and nothing else. And she decided only to wear white, which is always an interesting color for women, as we know, on all kinds of grounds. Not only the suffragists, but brides and suffragists and nuns, and it's a very all-purpose, mysterious signifier. So yes, so she did this when, for most people, you make peace with your life, you make peace with your mistakes. So she graduated from purgatory to a kind of heaven.
Yes. That's just,
There it is.
yeah, that's just what I was thinking. And that goes all the way back to when Louise and I talked, I was so struck because this is the very end of the Dante piece, and you quote James Baldwin, people who shut their eyes to reality simply invite their own destruction, James Baldwin wrote. And anyone who insists on remaining in a state of innocence long after that innocence is dead turns himself into a monster. But Dante, here in Black's thoughtful rendering, invites us to believe that we can banish our demons alone and together if we resist unconsciousness. And then this, can I do the beautiful translation too? As a man dismayed who turns to face the facts, changes his fear to trust in his own strength. When to his eyes the truth has been uncovered, so I changed. And when my leader saw me freed from those anxieties, up by the rampart he moved, and I behind him toward the height. That is so moving to me.
So it's so moving. And the I forget what unconsciousness is in the original. in the original canto. But yes, that's what purgatory is about. It's about divesting yourself of unconsciousness.
Mhm.
And I think that's sort of what writing is about too. In some ways, it's you don't get rid of it, you don't banish it, but you transcend it.
Ah,
And so yeah, it was an extraordinary moment. It's an extraordinary moment in purgatory.
yeah, that's it's just beautiful. Eric, do you want to come on here and ask some? Because I know that people must have questions for Judith. Are they piling up there?
People must have them, although I also just want to continue to hear you three talk, and because we've all been just dazzled here listening to all of you tease out some of the ideas that are in A Left-Handed Woman. And just to remind all our viewers out there, you can purchase this. It just came out yesterday, and explore some of these things on your own. This conversation about language is so fascinating, and people are chiming in about it. So want to just pick up a few of those threads. I'm going to start with one of my own observations, and one of my most beloved sentences in this book is from Judith's essay on Emily Dickinson, in which you say, Judith, that although of course Emily Dickinson wrote in English, it was an utterly unique English, and you call it an unworn language. What a dazzling phrase. So that sort of connects to a question a viewer has about if any of you could say more about the viscerality of language, and how that viscerality translates onto the page, and maybe even speak personally. How do you know as a writer when you've captured the essence, when you've put it into language?
That's a really profound question. I think it's easier to answer it in terms of something else, just to put the pencil in the glass of water. And how do you know when you're writing a biography, say, what the truth is, when you have all these different versions? And all I can say, after all the 50 years that I've spent trying to do it, it's the heft. You feel it. It's the heft in your hand of something, the solidity of it. And for me, when I finally been able to articulate that when something has been eluding me and I'm able to grasp it, and at that moment of being set free, that moment in which language recovers its incantatory power, it's a feeling. It's a feeling. It's not intellectual. It's not. And if you're sort of, and it's not about admiring, your virtuosity. It has nothing like that. It's what I've been feeling from Louise and from Kate as we've been talking. This is a visceral sense of connection with something real.
Wow, that's what a beautiful answer. And I'm gonna, that heft, doesn't that really does, like that? That's it. You feel like you have your hand around something, and at the same time, the transitory nature of everything. You're not going to be able to hold on to it, but you held on to it for a minute, and it's electric in its heftness. Yeah.
And then you have it on the page. You can go back to it and remind yourself that you had it for that moment.
Right. And you're right. It's not self-congratulatory. It's just like, it's a feeling of you're plugged in, kind of.
It's a feeling of being blessed.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
That you, if someone has gone like this, they've blessed you, and you've had this proof of it.
Yeah.
Wow. I have to ask this too, just because every great writer of prose that I've met anyway, I know has a relationship to poetry, has either written it or reads it deeply. Judith, I think you began as a poet. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I wonder if any of you, just going on this language bent here, would talk a little bit about poetry.
Judith will.
Well, let Louise talk about it. She's the great poet.
Yeah.
No, I'd have to go back to what we were talking about just a moment ago, and talk about line by line what what gives you the sense that you've hit something. And I think it's that sense that you've expressed an emotion that was hidden from you, or that was unknown to you, or that you found what you've called unworn language, or even if it's just for yourself. But I think this, as I was listening to us, we're talking like addicts. This keeps us coming back.
Well, that in fact relates to another question that's out there. Someone asking about Judith's comment that the human brain is actually changed by literacy. Is anything lost in that process? Yeah.
If it's lost, they didn't tell me in the MIT language lab, where they put me in the fMRI machine to see my macaroni brain. But I don't know. That is a great question. I'm going to write to Evelina Fedorenko, and I'm going to say I was doing this event with Rain Taxi and these wonderful women, and this one of the members of the audience asked that, and she'll write back, and I'll let you all know.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, I think I would say that a great deal of memory is lost.
Mm-hmm.
Because writing is like a computer. We have a way now of referring back that isn't in here. And when we think about the great sagas, the Irish, the Norwegian, all of the indigenous sagas, these were all memory.
That's so important. It's such an important point. They were passed down orally for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
Millennia.
Maybe that.
And so the memory was the most crucial. It was one of your most precious possessions, because that was continuity dependent on memory of the group, of the culture, and it was passed down. And when you can write things down, it loses its urgency.
Mm-hmm.
Urgency is another really important thing. I think when we've been talking about truth and that moment, there's a sense of urgency that the transmission, the oral transmission of creation stories and of creation myths and of the great poetry. I think that can also be lost when all you have to do is go to, Google something. Mm-hmm. So I've always admired people who can know tons of poetry by heart, and it's can console themselves by reciting it.
It is a consolation. Something about this strain of thought with writing and the crucible of writing and emotion and memory connects to the title. And someone is asking about the title and maybe by extension the cover art, the sort of implication here. I was actually startled, and I want to show everyone this. The theme continues. I can't think of another book of essays that has this kind of a portrait on the back cover. Just maybe tell the audience a little bit about your thinking there, Judith.
Well, the first sentence is I write with my left hand, so it sort of begins what we're talking about, origin stories. You begin to write, and you use one hand or another, and this also goes back to the story of the point about singularity. So I'm left-handed, and I was aware of that the minute I started to learn to write, and my father, who was switched as he was born in 1907 or something, so he was switched by his Hebrew teacher, who made him sit on his left hand, sit on it for years, so he couldn't use it. He had to learn to write with his right hand. That screws your brain up. That scrambles something in your brain too. So to me, that the coincidence of this slightly, it's not a big deal to be left-handed, but a slight sense of singularity. My mother always said, "Don't call yourself a lefty." In kindergarten, it was the McCarthy era, and people would think that they were communists. And that also made a big impression on me. That the something shameful about me being a lefty was somehow shameful. So it was all part of this exploration that what I talk about, that women's lives of having to deal with shame and self-denial and desire and aggression and the sense of inauthenticity. So it was all tied up in a way with being left-handed. And the reason that there's a picture on the back is because I stopped having pictures taken of myself at a certain point, not out of vanity so much as just couldn't be bothered. And a friend, an artist friend, had made this drawing, and I thought it will speak to the drawing on the front, which is a late 18th century drawing that was given to me for a birthday by a friend and sits next to my writing desk. So that's how the cover, the design of the book came about. And I write about left-handedness in a metaphoric way, that the sense of being, the word for left is sinistra in Italian, and in sinister in Latin, and it means evil. You know, it goes back to sort of Dante, the sinister side of things. So a powerful woman is somehow a witch. She's on the left side. There are all kinds of metaphors for left-handedness. So it seemed to tie the book together, and that's how the title came to be.
Wow. And a similar question is coming in, maybe the other side of the street here, about speaking aloud. Do any of you, as you write these dazzling sentences, speak them aloud? Is that part of the process in any way?
Judith?
No, I don't. I don't read them aloud to myself. I've thought sometimes when I'm terribly writer blocked, that maybe I should just speak into a recorder, but I never somehow do it because I'm a Luddite. I can't figure out where the recording is on my phone. So no, I don't do it. Do you what about poetry? What about your children's books? Because they're read aloud. Do you read?
Yeah, I only when I get into that last draft, I find so much that needs to be changed just by the I look like a crazy person. I'm like Jack Nicholson, in The Shining, and I'm just like I look insane as I'm doing it, and I found it to be so necessary. Do you do it, Louise?
No, but I'm trying to read all of my books as audiobooks. So do you do that? Do you read your books for?
I've never done it myself. Other people have recorded them.
Yeah.
You're on. That's great.
Yeah.
So you're recording, Louise, all of yours?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to all of.
But as you work, do you do it as you're like? No.
Because and it's one thing I'll say, it's an amazing way to copy edit yourself, because even though your book has gone through multiple copy edits, there are always mistakes once you read it for a recording.
Well, that's true of translation. The best way to get to know any work is to try to translate it, because the intimacy that you have, sign by letter, phrase by phrase, is you're paying attention in a different way. You're paying attention when you're reading something aloud in a different way.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Kate and the idea of writing things that in some cases, some young people are reading the books themselves, but in some cases they're being read to, and so you're writing for someone to read to someone else, and that's sort of really interesting.
Yeah, and there's a real. I was just talking with somebody about this the other day, that it's such a powerful thing to read to somebody, to be the one who is reading to somebody, and that kind. It made me think when you were talking about the left brain and the right brain and bringing them together on the page, that act of reading aloud speaks to something like really primal in us, and like that storytelling, and it really connects us in a subterranean way.
It's a primal experience as a child, being read to, being told a story, but being read a bedtime story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Eric, I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
I know that you have to keep an eye on the clock, and I see your nervous look like, wow. Will they ever be quiet? Probably not. No.
I hope not. But we will have one last question, and it comes naturally because I'll tell people that You all, even though you've had such a rich and deep conversation, have only scratched the surface of all the you know, it's dozens of essays, but it feels like thousands of ideas in this book. And so, Judith, is there anyone you've especially loved writing about, or is there anyone you want to write about that you haven't written about yet? Or what's the subject matter that's on the horizon for you besides?
It's actually, oh, that was my light. There are a few things, and they're related to the subjects that we've been talking about. One story that I would love to go and report in Australia is the world's oldest story. It's a community that has been telling their creation myth, and the creation myth has now been dated geologically. There's a sort of newish discipline called Geo-Mythology, that the way that myths relate to geography and the changes, the cataclysms and the changes in geography. So this creation myth, geologists have been able to date it because it describes the transformation of the place where these people come from. So I'd like to do that story. And then I'd like to do a story on Emily Wilson, who's translating, first woman to translate the Odyssey.
Yeah. Yeah, we ran an interview with her in Rain Taxi when she did that. It was
great.
Yeah.
We're not settled yet. We haven't agreed to do it, but it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time.
I can't wait to read it.
And then, yeah. So those are a couple of ideas that. And then there's something else with caves, because there's a young artist who does sort of acoustic sculpture in relation to spaces. Every space has a note. Every space has a voice, and he's able to score them. At the note. So that's something else. And he's working now in the caves of the Dordogne. He's going to bring their voices out. So that's something else too.
Amazing. The world has no shortage of marvels. I for one am very grateful that writers like you can bring them to life for the rest of us. Thanks to the three of you so much for this rich conversation. Thanks to our great audience out there. I know that there's hundreds of people who've been wrapped by this conversation. Spread the word. This is a great new book out. Spread the word about the landmark fiction by Kate DiCamillo and Louise Erdrich. To all of you, have a great rest of the year, and we are just so grateful to have you as readers and listeners. Thanks again, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.